The Atlanta Braves won the NL East in 2022 for the fifth consecutive year, but it was quite the battle for the Braves as they had to fight and claw their way back in order to win the division, which ended up being one of the toughest divisions in all of baseball. That figures to still be the case in 2023. Today, we're going to take a look at the Braves' opponents in the NL East, talk about what they need to do this offseason and who is the biggest threat to the Atlanta Braves going into 2023. We'll cover all that on today's episode of Locked On Braves. So let's get into it.
You are Locked On Braves, your daily Atlanta Braves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, and welcome back to Locked On Braves, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, where we cover your favorite Atlanta sports teams each and every day. I am your host, Jake Mastriani, and you can follow me on Twitter at ShortstopBall. Also, make sure you follow the podcast on Twitter at LockedOn_Braves. Send in any questions, comments, or feedback that you have for the podcast. Always love hearing from you, the listener. Also, make sure if you're new, subscribe to us on YouTube. And if you're watching this video on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that thumbs up button and that notification bell to help support the show. And as always, thanks for making Locked On Braves your first listen of each and every day. Continuing to post episodes daily, 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, throughout the offseason. So a lot to get to on this episode. We're going to do an NL East offseason preview. I've yet to really break down the other teams in the NL East, which I think was maybe the best division in all of baseball last year. When you look at the fact you had 200-win teams and the third place team in that division ended up in the World Series. So I think it's certainly one of the toughest divisions, if not the toughest division in all of baseball. You're going to have three teams who are either going to be in the luxury tax or right there next to it, with obviously the Mets ready and willing to go way over, and the Braves and Phillies pushing that envelope as well. So I think it's the toughest division in all of baseball. I think we saw that last season as well. So I want to take a look at what the Mets, Phillies, Nationals, and Marlins have to do this offseason in order to compete, and do any of them have a chance of taking down the Braves in the NL East? Now, on paper, looking at things the way they are now as the offseason begins, I think the Braves are the pretty clear favorite in the NL East. The Mets lost a lot on the pitching side, which we'll talk about. The Phillies, I think, have some glaring question marks, and I think those question marks were there last year. I think they just got hot at a good time, and they do have some really good players up and down. Bryce Harper's going to miss half of next year, we already know. Marlins are an up-and-coming team that have maybe the best pitching staff in all of baseball, and I really like the trades that the Nationals have made. I think they could be a little bit of a scrappy team, but they're obviously still young and rebuilding and lacking just talent overall. But I like the moves that they've made in some of the trades where they've been in this rebuild. So let's go through this team by team. I'm going to talk about the losses, current lineup, and the needs for each team this offseason. I am recording on a new streaming platform tonight, so be with me as I go through the comment section, trying to learn all of that and how to handle all of those comments. But I see a bunch coming in and appreciate it. Thank you for joining me live here. Well, let's start with the New York Mets, the biggest threat to the Braves in 2022 in the NL East. They have some pretty big losses going into the offseason. Brandon Nimmo, the only really position player, but they use a lot on the pitching side with Ottavino and Lugo from the bullpen, and Chris Bassett, Jacob deGrom, and Taijuan Walker from the starting rotation. They did pick up Carlos Carrasco's $14 million team option for 2023. So right now, you look at the top of that rotation, it's Max Scherzer and Carlos Carrasco, and then there's some question marks after that. They also have already signed Edwin Diaz to a 5-year, $102 million deal to help shore up that bullpen, one of the biggest reliever deals ever signed. So they get him back. We know how great he was last year. As the current lineup stands right now, it's Thomas Nido and James McCann at catcher. However, they have a top prospect and somebody that a lot of people consider to be the best prospect in all of baseball, in Francisco Alvarez, who could be in the mix for that catcher spot. He did make his debut last year, so he's certainly we could see him at the catcher position this year. You got Pete Alonso at first, Luis Guillorme at second, Francisco Lindor at shortstop, Eduardo Escobar at third base. However, again, another one of their top prospects who got a cup of coffee last year, Brett Beatty, he likely competes for that job as well at third base. And then you could move Escobar either a second or the bench and let him and Guillorme fight it out at second base. In the outfield, you got Mark Canha, Starling Marte, Jeff McNeil. So it's really already a pretty solid outfielder, although I would say they don't currently have a center fielder. I know Starling Marte can do it, but I've been saying for years he's not a center fielder. He doesn't rate well there. So I think that's one of their needs for me that I'll talk about in a second. The DH, they have Daniel Vogelbach and Darren Ruff right now. I think they're probably looking for an upgrade there as well. The starting rotation, I mentioned Scherzer, Carrasco at the top, then Tyler McGill and David Peterson, and then I'm not sure what at the moment. There needs two big arms for the rotation. I think they ultimately get one of DeGrom, Rodon, or Verlander. I think they get one of those guys, probably DeGrom, although there was news that they met with Rodon on Tuesday. So they're certainly, out there looking, but I think they get one of those big three. And then I think they bring back, another mid rotation guy. Maybe they reunite with Chris Bassett, but I think they get two, middle to top of the rotation arms this offseason. I think they get two big arms for the bullpen as well. And to behind Edwin Diaz and Drew Smith to replace Ottavino and Lugo. So I think they need two arms for the rotation, two arms for the bullpen. And then I think they need a true center fielder, but there's really not any of them available. You're looking at like maybe a Kevin Kiermaier, but that's a defensive first type of player. They could just go for a corner outfield bat, live with Marte in center field. And if they do that, I think they obviously have the money to go after a Judge or, bring back Brandon Nimmo. But I think they also probably look at the secondary tier there of outfielders in Haniger, Brantley, and Benintendi. So again, I think they get two big arms for the rotation, two big arms for the bullpen, and then I think they get one position player, whether that's somebody for, third, second, or outfield. I think those are the moves that the Mets make this offseason. Honestly, I think it's the moves the Mets need to make in order to get back in competition with the Braves for the division and in the postseason as well. I mean, they don't replace DeGrom at the top of that rotation. That's a big loss. That's a big step back, in my opinion. Obviously, you can't replace Jacob deGrom, but to me, that'd be a step back for the Mets going into next year. All right, looking at the Philadelphia Phillies, they have some key losses on the pitching side as well. They have Gene Segura on the position player side, but then Zach Eflin, David Robertson, Corey Knebel, and Brad Hand out of the bullpen. Still got some solid arms out there, and Sir Anthony Dominguez and Alvarado. They also lose Noah Syndergaard and Kyle Gibson from the starting rotation, so perhaps an arm there that needs to be replaced. You look at their lineup right now, you have JT Realmuto at catcher, Rhys Hoskins at first. Don't really know who's going to be at second right now. Bryson Stott at shortstop. He can move to second base if needed. Alec Boehm at third base, Kyle Schwarber in left, Brandon Marsh in center, Nick Castellanos in right field. And then, like I said, Bryce Harper is going to be out for half the year, and then when he comes back, he's going to be the DH. So still a really good lineup and a really deep lineup. Obviously, defense will remain a little shaky with the guys that I just mentioned. You look at their starting rotation, it's Zach Wheeler, Aaron Nola, Ranger Suarez, really solid top three. Bailey Falter, who had some good moments last year. Not really sure who has that fifth spot. They have a top prospect, Andrew Painter, who could be ready in 2023, but maybe not to start the season. I think he only had a handful of starts at Double-A. But I still think the back of the rotation is lacking a little bit. I look at the needs for the Phillies, possibly across the infield. There's talks of them wanting to replace Rhys Hoskins, Alec Boehm. He's had some good moments, but obviously both of those guys on the corner infield struggle defensively. Bryson Stott, I think, is a good player, and I think he really settled them down at shortstop and on the infield when he kind of got going there and took over, and he gives you a good at bat. I like Bryson Stott, but I think there could be some changes coming on the infield for the Phillies. They clearly have to get somebody up the middle, and they could be in play for one of the big free agent shortstops. I think Trey Turner would make some sense. You could even put him at second base, although that's a pretty hefty price. for a second baseman and keep Bryson Stott at shortstop. If not, they could go the cheaper route, maybe bring back Gene Segura, maybe go with Elvis Andrus, Jose Iglesias, or trade for Ahmed Rosario. So I think they have to get somebody, I believe, for the middle infield at least. But the rest of the lineup, is pretty solid. They're going to score runs. They need another starter for the rotation. I don't think they're in play for one of the top guys, whether it's DeGrom, Verlander, or Rodon. I think it's more likely a Nathan Eovaldi, Sean Manaea, or Chris Bassett, somebody in that range. But I think they get somebody like that. So for the Phillies, I think they get middle infielder and then a mid-rotation type starter. That's what I believe the Phillies will do this offseason and what they need to do in order to get back to the postseason and compete for a World Series once again. All right, next we'll take a look at the Marlins and the Nationals, two teams who are rebuilding but have some really good young talent that might not be far away. We'll talk about them next. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from football to basketball to soccer and esports. They've got it all at BetOnline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, and you obviously do, you're here listening to this one, you can find those at BetOnline as well. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. So continuing our NL East offseason preview, looking at the Miami Marlins. No key losses on this team, which, tells you they're young, and there's also just weren't really a lot of great players. They did DFA, or non-tender rather, Brian Anderson, who a lot of people have talked about as maybe a possibility for the Braves. I'm not sold on that idea, but they do non-tender him, so he's a free agent. At catcher, you have Jacob Stallings, Nick Fortes at first, Braves killer Garrett Cooper, Jazz Chisholm at second, Miguel Rojas at shortstop, Joey Wendell at third base, John Birdie in left. That could be taken by JJ Bleday, one of their top prospects who got some time last year at the big league level. Brian De La Cruz in center, Avisel Garcia in right field. World Series hero Jorge Soler at DH, along with Jesus Sanchez. That lineup needs some work. There's really one, maybe two positions in there that are locked. The lineup needs work. There's no doubt about that. But you look at this starting rotation: Cy Young winner Sandy Alcantara, Pablo Lopez, Jesus Luzardo, Edward Cabrera, Trevor Rogers. They got Braxton Garrett, Yuri Perez, knocking on the door. It's one of the best starting rotations in all of baseball, so much so that they could be looking to trade from some of that depth in order to make some upgrades to the lineup. Pablo Lopez is a name that's been floated out there for a while now, and somebody that could potentially get moved this offseason. You look at the needs for the Marlins, pretty much everything outside of second base and starting pitcher. They need bullpen help. They need outfield help. I think they would love to get rid of Avisel Garcia in right field. John Birdie, he's a guy that can play everywhere, and I think JJ Bleday openly takes one of those spots in the outfield. Miguel Rojas, a solid defender at shortstop, but they could certainly use an upgrade there. Garrett Cooper kills the Braves. I don't know that he necessarily does that great against other teams. So again, there's plenty of room to make upgrades here. And, they have a very good farm system. There's players on the way, but I could see them trading from some of that starting pitching depth this offseason in order to improve some of the position players for the Marlins. If they can do that, and they can just get a little bit of offense, if Jazz Chisholm stays healthy, if JJ Bleday turns into the big-time prospect we all thought he was coming out of Vanderbilt, they get another bat or two in that lineup. Jorge Soler stays healthy and hits like he did with the Braves. You could maybe envision a world where the Marlins, have a really good season, but they're in a really tough division, and that lineup just is not going to hold up. As great as that pitching is, that lineup's just not going to get it done over 162. So they got some clear holes that need to be filled in the lineup before we start to see the Marlins turn the corner on their rebuild. As for the Nationals, may surprise you. I really like what they have going position player wise and starting pitching. No real significant losses this offseason. Cesar Hernandez, Steve Cishek, Sean Doolittle, Joe Ross. So nothing major there. Again, a young team who's rebuilding. Kybert Ruiz at catcher. First baseman Joey Meneses, again, another Braves killer. Luis Garcia at second base. CJ Abrams, one of the top prospects they got from the Padres in that Juan Soto deal. He looks like a good young shortstop. They just signed Yeimer Candelario today to play third base. So they have him in there now. Josh Palacios in left field. Victor Robles in center. Lane Thomas in right field. Not sure who they have at DH. So certainly still some question marks there in the lineup. But I like Ruiz. I like Abrams. That's a pretty good, solid foundation that they have there. I just need to get a couple more guys around them. And then the rotation, I like Josiah Gray. I think he's going to be a solid, middle to top of the rotation, maybe a 2 or 3 starter. Patrick Corbin, just eating up a hole in their in the payroll and in their starting rotation as well. Cade Cavalli, big prospect. Mackenzie Gore as well. Both of those guys got a taste of the big leagues last year, and I think are going to be solid in rotation. I think Gray, Cavalli, Gore, are going to be a really solid top of the rotation for the Nationals. And then Steven Strasburg ever stays healthy. I mean, you could be looking at a pretty good Nationals rotation. But again, kind of like the Marlins, they really need some help in the lineup. They need help primarily in the outfield. I think they go out and get a couple of cheap outfielders this offseason, a Tommy Pham, somebody of that regard that you can get on a pretty cheap deal, on a 1-year deal and just kind of piece it together in the outfield. Need somebody obviously at DH as well. So again, there's pieces there. You got Carter Kieboom coming back off Tommy John surgery, once a top prospect in the national system, just hasn't been able to get it going, hasn't been able to stay healthy. Perhaps he puts it together. Again, kind of like the Marlins. I like the Nationals rotation. It's not as deep as the Marlins, but again, like the Marlins, huge holes in the lineup. And I think they could piece it together this offseason and put a decent lineup together. But again, the competition in the NL East is so good, it's just not going to be enough to get it done. So the Marlins, Nationals, are clearly the 2 worst teams in this division. But, I see signs, at least in the rotation, of those 2 turning things around. So that's where I think the other 4 teams in the NL East stand right now and what they need to do this offseason. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below on YouTube and in the chat as well. And we'll take a look at some of those next. A little bit of news from Tuesday, and I talked about this already. The Mets met with Carlos Rodon, one of the top free agent starting pitchers this offseason. So it's clear they're out shopping at the top of the market for starting pitching. Maybe that means things aren't going particularly well with Jacob deGrom. We'll have to see how that plays out, but sounds like they did at least have a meeting with Rodon. We'll see if those talks intensify. All right, I'll take a look at the chat section. Got a lot of comments out here. Want to get through real quick. Anthony Hood, I kind of want to talk about this. He said, let's see if Alex makes a surprise move and signs a good player for left or re-signs Duvall. I've been saying this pretty much all offseason. I think the Braves make one big splash this offseason. I think it's either at shortstop or left field. I think you're either going to see them sign Dansby at shortstop and then go after Adam Duvall for left field, or I think you're going to see them stick with Arcia and Grissom at shortstop and go after Andrew Benintendi, Mitch Haniger for left field. I think there's one big move in the Braves this offseason. So again, it all depends on which move makes the most sense. And a lot may depend on what Dansby Swanson gets offered from other teams. And if he just gets outpriced for the Braves, because I don't see Alex going over, what he feels comfortable going over for Dansby Swanson. And I think he's at that number. And if another team, goes way over to the point where Dansby just can't pass it up, I think Dansby's gone. And I tweeted out today, because there's a lot of people projecting hits $25 million a year. What one stat do you look at with Dansby Swanson over his career and say, I see this guy being worth $25 million a year over the next 6 years? Obviously you can look at 2022 as a whole, and you can look at his WAR numbers, and it tells you he's one of the best players in all of baseball. But you look at his career, where he was, a 6 WAR player in 2022. He's primarily been a 2.5, 3 WAR player. Good. I want Dansby. Don't get me wrong. It's just, what do you see over his career to tell you he's going to be a 6 WAR player for the next, 5 or 6 years? Because that's what you're paying him. If you're paying him, $25 million a year, in my opinion. Yeah, Anthony talked about the Astros picking up Abreu, who was with the White Sox the other day as well. That's a big pickup for the Astros. They're going to be good next year. Hines says, we're in one of the top 2 toughest divisions. Us, Philadelphia, and the Mets are all threats to win it all. It'll be interesting to see how divisions factor in now that everyone plays everybody. That's a great point, Hines. I did not bring that up. The schedule changes in 2023 where, everybody plays everybody. You're still playing your division opponents a good bit more, but it does, kind of level things a little bit. We'll see if the NL East kind of just dominates some of the other divisions out there. They beat up on each other. As Braves N01 says, should be a good division race again this year. See a couple more here. Hines says, again, if the Braves pay big for shortstops, then they'll need to get cheap in left field. While Duvall, Grossman, and Pollock are good, I think Brian Anderson would be a sneaky addition that could pay off. I talked about Brian Anderson a minute ago as the Marlins non-tendered him. I would honestly love Duvall, Grossman, or Pollock all over Brian Anderson. I'll say the only plus side with Brian Anderson is he can play corner infield spots. So you get the possibility of getting a backup for Riley and Matt Olson. But I would still take Duvall or Grossman. I'd really take AJ Pollock, but I think he's going to be out of the Braves price range, but they have some good splits. Gary Gibson says, we need one of the big 4 shortstops. If not Dan's, then one of the other 3. Also, how much has Benintendi going to cost? And do you think Ozzie is going to be helped by the shift going away? If they're not going to spend on Dansby, I just don't see them going after one of the other 4 shortstops out there. Maybe Xander Bogaerts, if his price comes down a little bit. As far as Benintendi, he's been projected at around $15 million a year over 4 years, so not too terribly bad. Some of that could depend on Justin Henry Malloy, who we talked about in yesterday's podcast on Miners Monday. If they think he could be ready later in 2023 or potentially 2024, maybe you go with a platoon to start in 2023. See if that works out. Malloy gets going, you call him up. If it does work out, then you just ride that out for the rest of the season, and hopefully Malloy's ready for 2024. And I do think Ozzie, Matt Olson, I think they're both going to benefit greatly from the shift going away. I think both of those guys will for sure. All right, let's see a couple more here. Got a lot of comments. See, JL says Acuna will be better next season, and that will help. That is a great point. And something I heard on, I believe it was a Battery Power podcast I was listening to, the fact that the Braves were so good last year and so good offensively, and yet we know there's another level to Ronald Acuna Jr. that we didn't see, or at least see consistently. If he gets back to that level, obviously upgrades or not, I think this offense is still going to be one of the best in baseball with a healthy Acuna. Hopefully Soroka will be solid. I'm certainly right there rooting for Soroka. Would be a big get for the Braves, a big boost for the Braves. Rico Baker says Philly's got a lot of money available. They really do. And they obviously are going to spend it. Rico also says the Marlins lineup is still trash. I can't disagree with that either. Braves N01 says Mets are definitely going to be a problem next year, kind of like this year. I agree. Look, they're going to blow through the luxury tax. They're going to spend big. Like I said, I think they get 2 top of the rotation arms, 2 bullpen arms, and then possibly an outfielder or some other type of bat as well. They have to. They almost have to, just to get back to the level that they were last year, which put them neck and neck with the Braves. No more Soto with the Nationals, so good. That's certainly one good thing. Let's Let's see. If Soroka comes back strong, we will have the best pitching in the NL East. It's hard to argue that as well. I think, again, you look at Fried, who finished second in the NL Cy Young voting. Spencer Strider, second in the NL Rookie of the Year. Charlie Morton, I know he wasn't great last year, but been one of the better pitchers. Kyle Wright, 21-game winner. You add Mike Soroka, and obviously if he can get back to his prior form as a top of the rotation player, I think, Braves certainly would have an argument to be one of the best rotations in all of baseball. See if we got one more in here to get to. Again, apologize, streaming on a new platform tonight, so trying to learn all of this here. Braves N01 says, where does Harris bat next year? For my money, I'd bat him second. Acuna, Harris, Riley, Olsen, good balance. I've thought about that as well. And I almost say you start him lower in the lineup to begin the year. If he comes out and hits the way that he did in 2022, I would honestly love for him to be the new leadoff hitter. I know that's Ronald's spot, but perhaps, especially against righties, I know Harris struggled against lefties a little bit. Maybe you bat him first or second against righties, and you put him, 6th or 7th in the lineup against lefties. But I do like him at the top of the order. Again, especially against righties, if he's going to hit the way he did last year, I'd bat him first or second. I think that's a solid spot for the Braves. If you bat him second, it gives you that right with Acuna, left, right with Riley, and then left with Olsen. So good balance at the top there. I definitely agree with that. All right, that will do it for this episode of Locked On Braves. Thanks as always for joining. Thanks for the comments in the chat section. Thanks so much for the comments on YouTube as well. Appreciate all of the conversation there. Again, thanks for making Locked On Braves your first listen of every day. Now go make your second listen, Locked On Sports Today. It's the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. You can find that podcast on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts, just like this one. Again, thanks for listening. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at LockedOn_Braves. You can follow me at ShortstopBall. Also, make sure you rate, review, and subscribe to the Locked On Braves podcast wherever you get your podcast, and we will talk to you next time.